the decision to start the military operation in the Ukraine, it was a very uneasy decision for the Russian president. He was compelled to make such a decision, as he put it. And the goals for such an operation, there are two main goals. The first one is the protection of the civilian population in the two republics of Donbass, to break away republics of Donbass, that proclaimed their independence, which were recognized by Russia. And the second one is the demilitarization of the Ukraine. The first one, the protection of the civilian population of the two republics in the Donbass. So the root of this problem, it dates back to the 2014. In 2014, in February, the anti-constitutional forceful coup d'etat happened in the Ukraine. It was organized and staged by the ultra-nationalists, and it resulted in that the democratically elected president of Ukraine at that time, Viktor Yanukovych, he had to flee the country just to save his life because of the threats to be killed. And after that, so the power came over to these ultra-nationalist forces in the Ukraine, but part of the Ukrainian society refused to accept the new authorities and their new political course, because they started to pursue the anti-Russian policy, and they started to violate the rights of the Russian-speaking population. And you know that in Ukraine, 40% of the population speaks Russian. They recognize Russian as their native language. But the number of the Russian-speaking population is much more. I think about 70–80% of the Ukrainians speak Russian fluently. So the new authorities started to violate the rights of the Russian-speaking population by banning the Russian language. So they introduced the ban to speak Russian, and they started to close the Russian-speaking schools and so on. And so that part of the Ukrainian population, the Russian-speaking population, which traditionally lives very compactly in the eastern and south of Ukraine, so they said that they will resist the radical nationalists and they are ready to defend their rights with weapons. In 1991, the Soviet Union dissolved, as you know. And after that, Russia has been trying for many years to agree with the United States and with NATO about the new security arrangements in Europe, the new architecture of security in Europe, and so that it will be an equal and indivisible security. But all our attempts to agree with the Western countries and NATO, unfortunately, were in vain. In the 90s of the 20th century, we had relatively good relations with NATO, and in 1997 we even concluded a so-called Russia-NATO Pact, which is a kind of a basic treaty, basic relations treaty between Russia and NATO. And NATO gave us several times the assurances that it will not expand eastwards towards the Russian borders. It was the, oral promises. They were not fixed on the paper, unfortunately, and it was a mistake from our side that we did not insist at that time to put it in a treaty, like a treaty. And despite all these promises from the NATO since 1997, there have been 5 waves of expansion of NATO eastwards.
Does the Russian government have any desire to have some of these territories or states, such as the Baltic states, be returned under their sphere of influence?
We don't want to return these republics to our sphere of interest. What we only want is that republics which are bordering Russia will be peaceful and neutral republics, and that there will be they will not pose any threat to Russian security.
So that includes Latvia, Estonia as well?
As well, yes, but I would like to put it clearly that we don't want them to get back there into Russia. No. We want them to be independent states, but states which pursue a friendly policy towards Russia.
So is the Russian government contemplating any military action like what was taken in Ukraine to ensure that these states are neutral?
No, first of all, Russia does not have such an intention according to the other states. And you know that those states which are members of the NATO, they have the special guarantees by the organization. So it could result potentially in a war between Russia and NATO, and none of the parties want that for sure. No.
But sticking to that point of NATO, don't you believe that the military operation currently undertaken will make NATO leaders more determined to expand its reach to include non-allies, which is opposite to what the stated objective of President Putin is?
Well, as I have already said, so in case of the Ukraine, so we want the only desire that so the Russia has is to have a Ukraine as a peaceful and neutral state, which enjoys good, friendly relations with Russia. After 2014, after the year when the Ukrainian forces changed their policy towards Russia, the Western countries started to supply to Ukraine a lot of armaments. So also the advanced armaments, heavy armaments, offensive armaments. And of course, Russia cannot be happy with such a development of the situation. Because you know that, just a technical fact, but if the missiles will be deployed, in case the missiles would be deployed at the border of Ukraine, so the flight time of the missiles from the Ukrainian border to Moscow is just 5-7 minutes. Of course, we feel naturally concerns about that.
But there is a view that, according to political analyst John Rapley, Mr. Putin is becoming unhinged, where he speaks on examples of denazification and preventing a Ukrainian genocide. Isn't this, though, in your view, potentially harkening back to a wider history with the Soviet Union? Or do you believe then that these actions or these statements may prove problematic for Ukrainians who may want to have their own sense of self-determination?
No, nobody determines the Ukrainian self-determination. So, as I have already mentioned, we want to have Ukraine as an independent state. We just enjoyed a friendly relations with Russia. Nobody puts the Ukrainian sovereignty and self-determination into question. No. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Russia recognized all the former Soviet republics as an independent states.
What happens if Ukraine wants to pursue its own foreign policy and be a part of NATO? Do they have a right to pursue their own foreign policy?
Every state has the right to decide upon the way how to secure its, how to ensure its security. But it's so that we proceed from the assumption, and it's not only our assumption, it is a point which is fixed in many European documents, pan-European documents, that one country cannot ensure its security at the expense of the security of the other country. That is a very important point.
But is Ukraine really a threat? Russia has one of the largest, most advanced militaries in the world compared to Ukraine, which is still a comparatively smaller country. How can it can't be argued that Ukraine is a threat?
First of all,
Russia?
I would say that Ukraine is not so small country. It's one of the biggest European countries with a population of over 40 million people. But what we cannot accept is that Ukraine would be a member of the NATO, because it's some kind of a red line for Russia. Because you know that what matters in the real world is the potential, not the words, but the potential. And probably you have heard the statement of the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky when he made a speech delivered a speech at the Munich Security Conference. Just maybe 10 days ago, he said that Ukraine does not exclude in the future the situation that the country can restore the capacity to produce nuclear weapons. Of course, we are very concerned about that, because Ukraine was part of the former Soviet Union, and they have all the necessary technologies to produce the nuclear weapons.
But the 1994 Budapest Memorandum had indicated that former Soviet states such as Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Ukraine will receive guarantees from Russia, the United States, and the UK that if they were to give up their nuclear weapons, then Russia would respect the territorial integrity. Well, these countries would respect the territorial integrity of these former Soviet states. Isn't taking Crimea and now invading Ukraine a direct violation of that agreement?
No, regarding the Crimea 2014, there was a referendum there, and the people decide themselves that they won't be part of Russia.
But a referendum after there was an invasion into Crimea. So can the Russian state really argue that this was an impartial vote, given that this referendum took place after an incursion in the country?
Well, it all was a result, as I said, of this anti-constitutional coup d'etat, which happened in February 2014, when the radical nationalists seized the power, and they started to threaten the Russian-speaking population. So, if Russia did not undertake some measures to protect the people who are living in the Crimea, and the Crimea for many, many years, for centuries, was part of Russia. So I think that over 80% of the population is ethnic Russians. So it could be the same situation like in the Donbass. So the hostilities could break out, and it would be the same situation. Russia just wants to have a friendly, Ukraine as a friendly and a peaceful and a neutral country. And probably you have heard already, there are already some indications from the Ukrainian authority, from President Zelensky, that they would be probably ready to consider the neutral status of the country, of the Ukraine, in case they will receive the strong security guarantees.
And what if a president is elected in the future that is also in favor of the West and wants to join NATO? Will Russia continue to interfere or invade a country like Ukraine to secure that interest?
You know, as I have already said, so it's up to the Ukrainian people to decide who will be their president. But we have a good example of a neighboring country to Russia as Finland, which is a part of the Western bloc. They are not part of NATO, they are a neutral country, but they have been enjoying their good and friendly relations with Russia for many, many decades, since the end of World War II. It's a very good example how a country bordering Russia could not be under the Russian influence. Finland has always been part of the Western world, but they enjoy very good relations with Russia. So the Russian-Finnish relations, it's a perfect example of the good neighborhood relations.
Understood. And President Putin had said, and I quote, "If anyone who would consider interfering from the outside, if you do, you will face consequences greater than any you have faced in history." These were his words. Should the world fear Putin unleashing nuclear weapons if countries such as the United States decides to provide assistance to Ukraine?
Well, I don't think that in the modern world that somebody will use the nuclear weapons, but well, yes, there are Russia, United States, and 3 other countries which officially possesses the nuclear weapons, but it has always served in the history as a deterrent. None of the countries have used it.
But you previously stated that a major concern for Russia was Ukraine exploring the possibility of building nuclear weapons. But you have just indicated now that you don't believe that any country would really do it, and it's more a deterrent.
Yes,
so isn't that inconsistent?
Yes, but there is a potential possibility to use it.
Mm-hmm.
So to use it in practice, one thing, but to have a potential possibility to use it, it's another thing.
In your view, if there's any instability in neighboring states, so like what you have mentioned in 2014, are you saying that Russia will use its right to ensure security in those particular circumstances?
Russia would not like to be encircled by hostile countries. I think it's a desire of every country to have a friendly neighbors in its borders.